Hello, environmental economics students. Dr. Conway here for lesson 2, the key concepts of environmental economics. This lesson is at the philosophical level, the broad concept level, rather than the key concepts of applied environmental economics in conducting a study, let's say. So we're still at the conceptual level here. Last week I discussed with you the concepts of different schools of economic thought and what their predominant emphasis was. We concluded on that environmental economics was very much about, improving our ability to take the environment fully into account in our economic decision making. So some of the concepts I'm going to talk to you about today fit into that mold. Okay, so let's deal with two major concepts first. The first one being the issue of the distinction between human-made capital, or the built environment, and natural capital. Okay, and it's natural capital that environmental economists want to have be seen to take more fully into account in economic decision making, right? And that's what most of the emphasis is in environmental economics, whether that be those standards informed by environmental economics, such as LEED, and any other type of a measure that tries to take the environment more fully into account into this. And one of the primary concerns they have with that is, how do we take the environment more fully into account in a way that makes economic sense and is justified? Okay. But let's look at the concept of natural capital. Humans derive a wide range of services from the environment, often called ecosystem services, another key concept, which makes human life possible, and this is known more broadly as natural capital. So let me put up these slides here for you. Okay, so that we dealing with those two concepts, human-made capital and natural capital. All right, natural capital provides a whole bunch of services. Some of them are very obvious, right? The food we eat, the water we drink, plant materials we use, for fuel, building materials, medicines, etc., all derived from the environment, right? Less obvious are things like climate regulation, natural flood defenses by forests and mangroves, and so on. Billion tons of carbon stored by peatlands, the oceans, pollination of crops by insects, natural filtration systems of water by sand, stone, and rock formations. They all filter the water system. Wildlife benefits we get, emotive benefits, but also use benefits we get from wildlife. Cultural values that have been heavily informed by natural environments, such as like with the case of indigenous peoples, and so on, right? All of these factors need to be taken fully into account, okay? And these are all factors that environmental economists want to see the natural environment taken more fully into account into the economic context. All right. Another key concept is the concept of carrying capacity. The evolution of concerns about carrying capacity can be understood to have followed the progression of modern industrialization and global population explosion. All right. Before the Industrial Revolution, a fisherman would go out on the boat, perhaps with his brother or whatever, and throw a small net in the water, a small line in the water, and the carrying capacity of the environment was never particularly threatened. Could it be threatened through war during medieval times and so on in very constrained geophysical areas? Yes, the environment could be seriously harmed, but on a global ecosystem basis, on a global natural capital basis, prior to the Industrial Revolution, I mean, we didn't have massive industrial scale exploitation of our natural resources. And with industrialization came massive population explosion as well, right? I mean, more people are alive today than have ever died in human history, and that's true, okay? So all of these things are a real key consideration in terms of how much of this can we continue to do with population growth and industrial scale exploitation. How much of this can we continue to do before we exceed the carrying capacity of the environment on a global scale? We're already seeing carrying capacity being exceeded on regional and local scales in a number of different sub-environments around the world, right? Resulting in desertification, burning off of the Amazon rainforest, loss of entire species of fish and animals, our own cod industry, right? We've seen all of these things occur all around the world. We see bits of it everywhere, and virtually every country of the world has a case of exceeding carrying capacity in some important area of natural capital, all right? And this has resulted in concepts emerging in ecological economics and environmental economics about the fact that there are real limits to growth, gang. I mean, we can't continue to grow indiscriminately, right? So, and with technological advancement, population growth, industrial scale expansion, and global proliferation of commercialism, environmentalism, and ecological economists point to the issue of limits to growth, right? It is not possible to continue with current trends without hitting these limits. We're already hitting these limits in a number of different areas, okay? And we're seeing that clearly with climate change, but climate change is one issue. We're seeing that in loss of endangered species, a loss of valuable rainforest, a loss of biodiversity, desertification, you name it, okay? Now, is it all horrible? No, of course not, but it is significant indicators out there that we are reaching limits to growth. Okay, and how well we can overcome these limits to growth, right? By being less aggressive with our growth, by curtailing growth in particularly harmful areas, by developing new technology to mitigate damage we're doing. All of these things come into play, and of that there are two different schools of thought: the technological skeptics, which reside in the school of ecological economics more than environmental economics, and the technological optimists, which tend to be more along the lines of environmental economics, okay? These different perspectives on carrying capacity and limits to growth, basically view technology quite differently, right? Technology is seen as a source of the problem as much as it is of a solution, and a technological optimist would see technology as being a source of a solution, not without problems, but the solution is more beneficial than any problems that are subsequently caused. And this leads us to different emphasis that ecological economists place on broad concepts as opposed to environmental economists, okay? For example, the ecological economists would say the only solution here is a steady state economy. Technology is as much of the problem as it is a solution, and that really what we need is a steady state economy, which is an economy of a stable or mildly fluctuating size. Okay, advocates are technological skeptics and feel that technology creates as many problems as it solves. All right, the concept is typically used to refer to a national economy, but can also be applied to local, regional, or global economies. A steady state economy entails stabilized population and per capita consumption. Birth rates equal death rates, and production rates equal depreciation rates of natural capital. Minimize waste allows for a steady state economy at higher levels of production and consumption. Okay, all else being equal, the steady state economy is indicated by stabilized gross domestic product. This would be advocated by ecological economists, but let's not think it's just some extremist position hanging over there on the left side of the equation. The fact of the matter is we're having debates about steady state economy throughout our economy this very day. Okay, look, take the Canadian oil sands for example, right? The classic example. Okay. Some people arguing that there are elements of our economy today that should be put into a steady state economy because their continued growth is just too harmful to the global, national, and local environments. Okay, climate change is a classic example. We need to move to a steady state economy with respect to how much oil and gas we're burning, and emitting GHGs into the environment. There's arguments about steady state economy in terms of how much we exploit whales, how much we exploit fish in the ocean to maintain a steady state where the economy is more balanced with the capacity of the natural ecosystem to shoulder the burden. Okay, so this is, while ecological economics is talking about this at a massive global scale, it's not that these points are not irrelevant. It's just that they're manifesting themselves on a sector by sector, society by society basis, depending upon the perceptions that the governments, the people have about what is tolerable levels of exploitation of the natural environment. Okay. And then another concept that what fits more in line with environmental economics is the concept of sustainable development, which I'm sure you've all heard about through your high school education or your college education in other areas. I mean, this is Our Common Future is the most well-known articulation of this concept, known as the Brundtland Report. It defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainable development acknowledges the problems of technology in terms of the harm to the environment, but also shares in technological optimism. Okay? The concept of sustainable development can be interpreted in different ways, but at its core is an approach to development that looks to balance different and often competing needs against an awareness of the environmental, social, cultural, and economic limitations we face as a society. In other words, okay, getting away from the language of the Brundtland Report, how do we take the environment more fully into account in our economic decision making so that in the future our resources are sustainable, they're protected? Okay? And that's what environmental economists are primarily concerned with, this question of how do we account for the environment far more effectively in our economic decision making and what we do in our built environment and in our daily lives to take the environment more fully into account in terms of the real costs we're imposing on the carrying capacity of natural capital. Okay? A couple of other really key concepts that are important in this area is the concept of market failures and externalities. Okay? Market failures occur when all costs of production fail to be internalized in the prices of products and services. Therefore, when you produce a product, you don't take the environment fully into account, and then the environment is not compensated, or other users of the environment are not compensated for that at a cost, and that has to be brought into the cost of the product. There's a perception that the product is a lot cheaper to produce and use than it actually is, and that fosters further unsustainable exploitation of the environment. Okay? Externalities are those costs that are not internalized in price. They can appear in the form of pollution, unsafe labor conditions, child labor, and so on. All strategies designed to produce higher profits at lower product prices, right? Industry would love it if they didn't have to, in all cases, take the environment into account and pay to maintain the quality of the environment, because they could sell their products much cheaper and there could be much more of them sold because they are cheaper, right? But environmental economists would say that's obviously a mug's game, a fool's game, because eventually our dependence on natural capital, we will exceed its capacity, and we will end up with a rather miserable dystopic future. Okay? And market failures and externalities, these impose costs on society rather than being internalized in the prices of products and services. Having worked in developing countries for more than 2 decades, one of the things that I often observed, and I did myself, right? I would go to, say, to India, up to Ludhiana in the Punjab district of India, and I would arrive there, and everybody, when I left the country, said, "Oh, get me some t-shirts, get me this, get me that." So for the same price of 2 t-shirts, I could get 30 in India, right? Bring them all back, give them to everybody. Heck, put one on my dog. I mean, they were so cheap. But were they really cheap? Were they really cheap to produce? Right? Without the regulatory enforcement in India, basically I was seeing, dyeing processes where you put the color on your shirt, okay, being done by small family units or small plants with dripping dye from clothes hanging over a river and a creek, and it was dripping into the creek and going. And literally the creek would be down there, and you'd see the creek had multiple colors. It was a psychedelic creek. By the time they were done, none of those costs were taken into consideration. Cost to the natural environment, cost to the people's drinking water, cost to groundwater, cost to the natural environment, cost to wildlife. None of those factors taken into account. And I'm not picking on India, right? I mean, this happens all over the world, right? I'm just giving you one example. I have several. Okay, having worked in both Asia, Africa, and Latin America for many years. And the bottom line is that these t-shirts were produced at a cost that was much lower than the actual cost needed to produce them, because the environment was not taken into account in the production of those shirts. Costs of the environment were not imposed on the production cost of those shirts, so I was paying under cost for all of those shirts. And what happens when you do that is you create further environmental problems. Price for goods and services is a critical concept because all prices embody vital information. That information is the predominant basis upon which the market, comprised of sellers and buyers, takes decisions. For instance, if there is a distorted product price, a price set lower than the actual cost of production because of unaccounted for externalities, pollution, loss of biodiversity, etc., then the market buyers will receive a signal that the product or service is cheaper than it actually costs to provide, resulting in market inefficiencies, right? You get a perverse signal. Oh, this is cheap. Well, is it really? Right? Is it really cheap? Okay. When prices are artificially low in the market, consumption of that product or service is artificially high as well, which is a compounding evil from this whole process, perpetuating higher levels of externalities, the perpetuation of conditions that harm the environment and social welfare, and the acceleration of those conditions, because I've received a signal like, hey, I can buy 30 for the same price of buying 2. I'll buy 30, right? Without having taken into account all the environmental damage those 30 shirts cost, as opposed to the 2 produced under more stringent environmental regulatory requirements. Okay? Alternatively, with an undistorted product price, the full costs of production were internalized in the product price. The product would usually be consumed and therefore produced at a lower volume, and lesser costs would typically be externalized to society and the natural environment. So as environmental economists, that's what we're concerned about, to improve the capacity of people, buyers, suppliers and buyers, the community at large, to understand the real costs of our consumption practices, our behaviors on the environment. And in order to do that, we have to improve ways to incorporate real environmental costs into our economic decision making. And that, in a nutshell, is the core element of what environmental economics tries to achieve. Okay, gang? So I'm looking forward. I hope you have a really good week. Looking forward to our Zoom call this coming week. And then I'll be back to you with lesson 3 next week. All right? Have a good week, gang. Take care. Bye-bye.